Okay, we're going. Here we go.
Where will they see it on our
It's on the Archives page, the Facebook page. They will have a notification.
folks? We have, what do we have? Coffee,
Cookies, and pop.
coffee, cookies, and pops. Please help yourself right back there.
Did you say pop?
Did I say
That's the word
pop?
for it. It's pop.
Soda?
Wow.
They say
Okay.
pop in Minnesota.
Yeah, they say pop in Illinois too. I get yelled at it.
Tricky.
Okay. Apparently my roommates are coming. And they're coming from Reynolds. So let's see how they do.
They're coming back with like sweeteners.
No. Where does it all set up? Oh,
Yeah.
well,
Cool.
somebody go and get the plastic off. This can be really intimidating. We're live right now.
Yeah, everyone's
So
looking at you.
right this minute, there's people that are looking at us. Holy crap! That is freaky. But no, wait. There was some. Lag.
Yeah, there's always
There's a lag. And why does it look dark? It looks dark.
Yeah, it's because my screen is.
Oh.
Let's do this.
This is the first time. Why hadn't we ever thought of doing this before for an evening?
Because you never hired me.
How many times have I used that word today? Genius.
Genius.
No, only our guest speaker arrives. 9 minutes. Huh?
Surprised we got or you could pull
Oh.
Magnaghi and NMU.
Here it comes.
He's here? Okay.
Yeah, he's
Do you think they've got this hooked up?
To the
the
speakers?
sound. You can give it a test.
How would
We
we
have
know?
to talk in a microphone. I'm sorry.
What's that?
We have to talk in a microphone.
Test it.
Girl. That's that microphone.
There you are. God. I called, I emailed. And I'm on my way. And you're on your way.
That's what I told myself.
We were thinking either here or there, the left, the book signing. Yeah, we're going to be live on Facebook.
I gotta text my mom.
Lydia and Libby
Yeah, I invited her.
Still kind of. And then which one? I don't understand why.
Those who protest together stay together.
Oh, I have everything. Well, the book was the main.
Right.
No, we're fine. I have no idea.
But like, I want
I did. I said he seems to be nonplussed.
I don't think he really understands what's going on.
We should have at one point scan the
I think
audio,
it's are on right now.
make it an interactive.
I think one, but I think it sends a
I feel like doing the dance.
I liked it.
Sends some hearts
It's
over.
just you. Yeah. It's just you that's on it.
I think so.
My mom's about to be on it, so
Let's have 2 viewers.
we got 2.
I'll send some.
Send her daughter.
Yeah.
She's still on Zoom.
No, she's asleep.
Yeah,
She has an alarm. Doesn't she know what a big event this
Oh, I
is?
got the evening.
You're here.
What's that?
check out my Facebook and all.
Oh, wow, look at all those even friends. Oh, whoa, that's so cute.
What time do you have? How much time do you have?
6 minutes.
Oh.
Don't let me, while I'm working on this, don't let me lose track of time. Okay, tell me when it's time. Leslie's watching? Are you serious?
She like.
Damn, I should have thought of this before.
Does this sound good?
I don't know.
It's very quiet.
Is there a way to turn it up? It is coming, something is coming up. Is there a way to turn it up?
Not on the computer. This is loud.
Okay, I just sent it.
Is there sound coming out of the computer?
Oh, no, it's not a computer. Oh, I can fix it.
I hear that come out of here.
Maybe it'll be like. The presenter view.
We're grabbing most of this.
Check to make sure you guys got it all set up there.
Are you?
Maybe
We were wondering if we could get the volume up a little bit.
volume up.
Yeah. Well, turned out it was better than you thought.
Yeah, this is not.
Huh? Well, it's, yeah, you want to?
Check, check, check.
Archives page, right?
Louder? Yeah. Yeah, and then turn it on.
Oh, nothing else.
Make sure it doesn't. Check, check. I'll just stay a second. Make sure you guys got everything going good.
Is that Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that's true. And then I'd say, okay, I'm using this.
Because I have.
Yeah, I tested it out.
Okay. So it'll just pop up with like a,
Yeah, it'll pop up with the
main homepage of the radio website. We could talk about that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He said that the one that deals with women or youth here got an award. Do you want to play that one maybe as the
We
example?
were gonna do the movie one and then the weird weather
We're
fact.
sure if that one has any commercials in it too.
No, that one shouldn't.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then we can play that.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's fine. We can do the other ones, but how long are you going to play him for? Because he's going to talk for half an hour.
We were thinking like maybe like the introduction of it.
Okay, that's
And
good.
then
And
just,
then, remind them too what the radio station is.
yeah,
Where it's from. Okay.
yeah.
Let me go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I'm so impressed with all of you that you're here tonight because it's like 16 degrees outside, or at least it was that cold when I came in about an hour or so ago. We were really worried about the weather, but it's great to see you here, and thank you for coming at our second evening at the archives for this semester. My name is Marcus Robbins. I'm the university archivist, and I'm a little nervous right now, not because I'm used to talking in front of people, but we're online. We're actually live right now on Facebook, and it's like really freaking me out. It's like it's strange. I feel like running away or something. This modern technology, it never occurred to me, to use that kind of thing for outreach. That's why I have these two. And so I want to welcome you again. Thank you for coming. Our program tonight is very exciting, I think. We've got our main speaker is Dr. Magnaghi, who I'll introduce in a little bit, but you probably all know. And he's going to be talking about his latest publication, The History of UP, which is a work long in coming. But first, our first program is two of my student assistants, Lydia, Serra, Henning. They both have L's, and I struggle with the L's. And Libby, Serra have done a great project. They've created an online exhibit, which they've called History of the UP Radio Talks. And it's still a little bit in development, but it is actually a series of 44 transcribed or digitized radio interviews that were done with Dr. Magnaghi in 2004. Those of us who are older, that's not that long ago, but of course they were tiny, when that happened. And they've digitally converted those recordings, done some editing work with them, and then created this website so that you can all enjoy those recordings now, 17 years after the fact. And so I'm going to introduce them here, and they're going to come up and they're going to talk about the website and what the work they've done. Lydia Henning is right here. She's graduating in May in 2018. She is my digitization specialist, web design specialist. All of our student assistants in the archives are trained as paraprofessionals, and they do very high-level amount of professional work. She's majoring in Spanish and minoring in art and design, and wants to tutor in Spanish and work translation jobs, eventually get jobs in translation after graduation. And Libby Serra, next to her, is a junior graduating in May, thank goodness. Because one of the hardest things for me is you get attached to these young people and they do great work for us, and then they have this annoying habit of graduating and leaving, and you have to start all over again. And Libby actually is from Chicago, Illinois. Where are you from, Lydia? I can't.
Fowlerville.
Fowlerville, that's right, down the road. She's a troll. And Libby is majoring in digital cinema, and she plans on doing ocean cinematography. Really? See, things I learned. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them.
Hello. So this is a small PowerPoint kind of describing what we did. So these talks were on our 1450 WMIQ radio in 2004, and they continued for a whole year. It's actually a collection of it's actually a collection of 38 interviews, because some of them didn't make it and some of them were still in the process of actually remaking. And so there are interviews from like current events. So at that point, so the George W. Bush visit, the election, as well as some weird weather facts from that year, and then expanding on. And then there's also stuff from the very beginning of the history of UP. So a lot of stuff about agriculture, a lot of stuff about the winter food supply, and a lot of stuff about Native Americans, as well as their ethnic foods and like their celebrations and stuff like that. So they're very interesting. And then the digitalization process is actually really cool. So we take the cassettes and put them in a cassette player, and then they're hooked up to an audio switcher that picks up the audio and transfers it into the computer through Adobe Audition. When there, we edit and then export it as an MP4, and then load it onto the website, and you can all listen to it whenever you want. And then this is the website.
Technology is good until it doesn't work very well. Maybe go to the archives website.
Oh yeah, I was up there.
That's right.
Okay, so this is the website. We got the homepage here. It's a collection of conversation. Oh, we already went. So I guess we wanted to go through the weird weather facts. Speaking of weird weather, so we got weird weather here. Libby and I made summaries for each of these. So.
City's looking for a high today around 70, but by the weekend, some showers may be moving in, and highs will only be around 50 degrees. More fall-like conditions, which means more leaves and more raking to do. We'll get into the forecast a little bit more in a few minutes or a little while from now, but we're talking about weather today. Matter of fact, we're going to talk extensively about weather in a kind of unusual way as we continue our series on the history of the UP, and our topic today is weather as we discuss the history of the UP, and of course the man we always discuss the history of the UP with, our good friend, Professor Magnaghi from Northern Michigan University. And good morning, Professor. Before we get into our topic today on UP weather, I've just been
Is it the,
It's the connection.
it's the connection?
handed a weather bulletin here I think I should pass along, and I hope you don't mind for a minute here. But it says here the National Weather Service, you know the beating Florida's taken recently, the National Weather Service has issued a warning for yet another catastrophic hurricane following on the heels of Charlie, Ivan, and Janine. I mean, it's hard to believe this. The path of this hurricane zigs and zags, turns around, switches sides, and is therefore highly unpredictable. Experts
Am I on, I'm not on LTE. Should be on the regular. Yeah, it's good.
You know, for persons, we're not, you know, we're not isolated from it, so we'll feel the impacts of these different developments. I know a number of years ago there was Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines erupted, and then threw out a layer of dust and so on, and that had an effect and so on. And I might just add kind of an interesting point here about, you know, the weather and where we're located. You know, we have this cold continental weather in the wintertime, and there's kind of an interesting story. Back in the 1530s, Jacques Cartier, the Frenchman, came to the New World, and he arrived in Canada and went up the St. Lawrence River and was checking things out. And they decided that the plan
Will it,
was they were going to stay, and they didn't think of the weather much. They just figured that where they were in Canada, kind of opposite where we're at, that is pretty much opposite France, and they knew what the weather was like in France. You know, kind of moderate, even though it's you know, with the way we would look at it, quite a bit north, and well, like Hudson Bay and so on, with opposite England. And so the poor Jacques Cartier came with this French contingent, and they stayed, and all of a sudden they got hit with a continental weather system in the wintertime. They didn't have that. They weren't France with the Gulf Stream, the warm Gulf Stream, bringing moderation there to their winter weather. And so here they are at about the same latitude, but suffering. And then they got scurvy. The Indians tried to give them a tea made with pine that would have given them vitamin C to counteract the scurvy.
do you want to just leave it there and move on?
Yeah, we were gonna
Or do you
do a
want to try
little
another one?
So this one might be loaded.
Yeah, so
If it's
we-
not, we'll.
But Thursday morning, 8 minutes after 8 o'clock, and it is time for our regular Thursday visit with our good friend from Northern Michigan University, the head of the history department. That's just one of the many hats that Professor Russ Magnaghi wears at Northern Michigan University. And he joins us today to continue our discussion on the history of the UP. And today we're going to be talking about the history of movies in the UP, as well as television and a few other things, the media in the UP from the very early days up to the present day. And Professor Magnaghi, we welcome you once again to Talk 1450. But before we get to talking about movies in the UP, one of the discussions we had back in February around President's Day was the connection of presidents, either current or former, visiting the UP. And now it looks like for the third time in our history, we're going to have an actual sitting president visiting the Upper Peninsula.
Well, good morning. That's correct, though I think some of the news that's coming out is not as complete. There were a number of other sitting presidents. There was William Howard Taft, who was campaigning in 1912.
1912, yeah.
Came through the Upper Peninsula by rail. Coming from Seattle, I guess, and going back to Washington. And then we had, in terms of the sitting president, we had President Ford came here when he flew
And that's the website. Hopefully they'll load better for you.
Well, I think you get a good idea of the project. Do you have anything more you want to add about it?
No, it was really fun making them. And
Does-
listening to all of them, definitely.
Does anybody have any questions for?
How do you access that?
So,
Yeah, it's on our main website page. It's under exhibits and then online exhibits.
On the
It's
NMU website or
the NMU Archives
The
website.
NMU Archives still show it to you.
What did you ladies learn?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of topics, so a lot of stuff was thrown at us in a short amount of time. And unfortunately, with that, we have a timeline of when we can edit things, so we can't just like sit there and enjoy an entire interview, unfortunately. But some of them are. The movie one is my personal favorite, just because I'm really into cinematography and stuff like that. So it was really cool learning about what was filmed here, why it was filmed here, why they would film here. So all that stuff's really interesting.
Great.
Do you want to show them, Lydia?
yeah, so if you go down to exhibits and public and professional presentations, we have this one here, and you can click the link there, or online exhibitions, and that'll be the first one, and it will take you to the website.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Great, thanks a lot. Well, with modern technology, you know, there's a shakedown, and we're still in the process of shaking down. This is kind of a thing in construction, and one of the things about wireless technology, it sometimes doesn't work as well, especially when the classes are all crashing in on the internet at the same time. But now we're going to fast forward basically 13 years and really talk to the guy that's on who's on the recordings. The man himself, Dr. Russ Magnaghi, who I know probably you all know. He came here to Northern in 1969, and he didn't retire until, or has he retired? Have you retired? I'm not really sure if he has. Maybe de facto retirement or something like that, but he certainly is still at it, always doing research. And what I really like about the fact that I was able to have two students come and do this project and present here is because not only is Dr. Magnaghi known for his research and his writing on the history, but he's known, I think, more so as a teacher and the way he works with his students. I can tell you how many times when he was still young and spry, been sitting in the archives reading room, and I'd have students in there, students who were doing projects, their papers, research projects, or whatever, and would have some difficulty, and he happened to be there doing his own research, and he would drop everything and sometimes talk with them and work with their historical problem that they're working on for more than an hour or so at a time. And I had seen this happen many different times in the archives. So I don't think I needed to go into much more background about Dr. Magnaghi, and I'm just gonna, without further ado, Dr. Magnaghi is going to come up and now talk about his publications, recent publications, including, most importantly, I think, the long-awaited history of the UP, and tell us how it all came about. And then he's going to be available afterwards to do some signing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad to see a good crowd turned out tonight. We had dinner at Van Gogh's, and it was kind of sparse. Usually Van Gogh's parking lot is crowded with people. Tonight there was plenty of room. My wife said, well, it's the weather. And I thought maybe we'll get one or two people here tonight, but we have a very, very good crowd. So thank you for coming. Let me make just some comments about some of the work I did. And some of this goes back, 14 years or so. Some of it goes back 30 years when I did the whole series of interviews with Italians in the UP, and that material is also online. But it was interesting when I did it. You do these things, you have absolutely no idea of any impending technology. Forget impending, just long-range technology. So I thought the best we would have would be transcripts of the interviews, and that was it. All of a sudden, I'm at an event, and this old Italian-American fellow comes up to me and he says, "Thank you for the interview. I heard my grandfather, who I had heard about, but I had never heard." And all of a sudden, he had gotten online. I didn't know it was set up, but he had gotten online and could hear it. So there were people, of quite excited to make that connection. But when I did it, I had absolutely no idea that this would happen. And then when I did these, when we did two sets of interviews. One, I don't know what happened to one, but it was broken up. Probably I did all of 6. But Peter Frecchio was one of my students, and then went back to Iron Mountain. And quite a few years later, said, "Why don't we do interviews? I'll call you up, and I'll interview you over the phone." And it was supposed to. It started out. It was going to be a short. I think some of the earlier ones are rather short. It was supposed to be about 10 minutes, 20 minutes. All of a sudden, it went on to 40 minutes. Finally, I had to tell him, "Hey, I have to go to class here in 10. At 10 to the hour. We're going to have to end this." And the other caveat was that I would not do any research. So there had to be topics that I wasn't going to go and spend a lot of time. It had to be, stuff I knew. And so, but what's sort of good about them is they were on the radio. So it's kind of just fun listening to. It's not an academic lecture and boring. It kind of flows right along. The sad part about Pete Frecchio was that he had health problems. I hadn't seen him since he left as a student. And then he came to campus after all of this, and he was like tremendously overweight. And a little while later passed away. So he passed away rather young. But as kind of the legacy was that he came up with this idea, and now for the rest of us, for the public and people on into the future, we have this, and then putting it online this way is fantastic because now it's available to the public. I thought the best I would get out of this would be a transcript, which would be absolutely boring, which nobody, unless you're doing some research, you're not gonna bother with. Where this one you can, they get it. I guess you put it online and listen to it on your phone. So it's turned out more than I ever thought would be possible. But let me just comment. I don't know if some of you came for the Prohibition story or the history of the UP story or both of them, and I might just throw it open. At some point, throw it open to questions. But let me give you a little background. I'm originally from San Francisco, and I went to graduate school in St. Louis with the idea that I would return to California and teach there. And so while I was in St. Louis, I wanted to see as much of the Midwest or anything that I could. And a friend of mine was coming up here, bring his family up, and he kind of came up first with a carload of belongings to teach in the winter of 1968. And I said, "Well, if you have room in the car, I'll help pay for gas, but I'll be able to go to this place far north." And so I came up here. So I actually came for a visit at the end of January 1968, and I should go back and look at the newspaper, in the middle of a storm probably almost as bad as the one we just had. The waves at the rock cut were immense, and we came around there. He was from Mississippi, I was from California, and we had no idea that we probably shouldn't have been out on the road in the middle of that kind of weather. But anyway, we chugged into Marquette. And I was here for a few days, but I wanted to go to the end of that peninsula so I could point to Lake Superior and say, like the bottom of Florida, I could say, I was at the end of that peninsula. Well, we only got up to about Eagle River, and it got dark and it was winter, so we came home. But that was my first excursion to the UP. And then I was hired in September of 1969, I started teaching. I was always interested in local history. And when I started out the field and why they hired me, they actually hired me to teach medieval Renaissance, and at that time they were still calling it medieval Renaissance man. Eventually they got around to calling it people. But anyway, I was teaching that, but then they had hired me to teach Latin American history. And so I did that down in Iron Mountain, much to my shock that I had to drive 90 miles to teach a class. But anyway, it was all fun. And then eventually we came up with, a good friend of mine, Bob Archibald, said, you know, you're in the Upper Peninsula, Latin American history doesn't have much of a life. What about doing local history? And so I started the process in the mid 70s, and I started teaching a course towards the late 70s, and then that just started the research. And what's kind of interesting is that my original syllabus, which was chronological and thematic, eventually came out in the book in that form. And I had a lot of trouble with various presses. Finally, I said, heck with it, I'll publish it myself and keep the royalties, complete royalties. And they wanted it chronological. The problem with that is that if you're looking at mining, then you're going to have to go through the whole book. What was mining going on in the 1730s in the French? What was mining in the 1840s? What about today? So I went back to the original format, and that was doing it topically. So there's a chronological section, then about 1840 it kicks over, 19th, 20th century it kicks over into topics. So there's fishing, there's mining, agriculture. I actually went back to what Henry Schoolcraft identified as the five major items that the UP was going to be important for. This was at the time of statehood when they were arguing whether or not the UP should be part of Michigan. And that was going to be the fur trade, timber, fishing, farming, and tourism. And the book is basically centered around those themes, and then I added some additional ones as we went along, ethnics and women and so on, and to complete the whole thing. And it's so it was an ongoing process because really nothing had been written about the Upper Peninsula between two covers. And I would always get people, or we'd get new presidents coming in, and they would ask me, is there a book on the history of the UP? And what I would do is round up a number of things that I had and give them to them. But there was like a half dozen books, little bits and pieces. And so finally there is something between two covers. Some people are going to say, well, it's too short. It should have been a lot longer. There is a bibliography in the book, and then online there is a very detailed bibliography on the, 250 some pages. So if you really want to pursue a topic, and the topics are wide-ranging, everything from the paranormal to mining. So it's all there. You can go and check out books and articles and whatnot. And it'll be very useful for students. At least they'll be able to focus on, they can check something, check a topic out. Has anything been written? What hasn't been written? What can I get into? And so I see it as being very, very useful for a whole scan of people, just the general population like yourselves and just interested in the history, might want to read about it, or students that want to focus on a particular event. And doing the work was kind of very interesting because there were elements that were left out, as happens with a lot of states. One would be Texas. Texas, the history of Texas is the Republic of Texas, 1836, when they drive the Mexicans out, and that's the beginning of Texas. And then people found out that, whoa, wait a minute, it goes back to the 1600s. And the same thing with the UP. It's kind of focused on mining, copper mining, and then simultaneous discovery of iron. And so that's the beginning of the history of the UP. When actually you go back to, the 1641, when the first Jesuit missionaries visit the Indians at Sault Ste. Marie and name the falls there and so on. So we have this very lengthy history. Then I got a lot of complaints that I spent too much time on the colonial era of the Upper Peninsula. Move along, move along. So, well, I kept the colonial era, maybe cut it back a bit, so you get the whole story. The other thing that happens in the Upper Peninsula is that you get people writing, especially in the Copper Country. You'll get people writing about the Copper Country, and there have been a number of excellent works that have been published by Oxford University Press and so on about copper mining and so on. But then that sort of ends the story. They just, and that's their field, the Copper Country. And so you have these big gaps around the Upper Peninsula where there is, for instance, the Eastern UP. And I have another book that I'm working on, and they're celebrating the, 1668 to 2018 is how many years? Anyway, they're having a big celebration at Sault Ste. Marie all during 2018, and I have a book that kind of focuses on the Eastern UP. But that's an area that has never really been covered. The Eastern UP, what was going on there with the earlier the French, and then Schoolcraft and so on, and the various ethnic groups. You find an area like Menominee. I went down to Menominee one time to the Historical Society, and the woman said, "You're the first person from Marquette that's been down here." Somebody from the university. Okay, I'm the first one. And what you don't realize is that Menominee, people kind of know it had a big era of mills, lumber mills, and so on. But what people don't realize is that it then becomes an industrial center. And even today, I think they're making helicopters, they're making furniture, and other things in Menominee. So Menominee is kind of the odd town out in terms of the UP, because it's an industrial center and doesn't have any connection with mining. And really, when you talk to the people there, they see themselves kind of not as Upers. They're sort of, we're not into mining, we're not into all those things you do up on the shores of Lake Superior. And so what I've done in the book, I've brought a lot of that together, so you'll get the view of the entire Upper Peninsula from one end to the other, east, west, north, south, and so on. And it might be brief and moves along, but as I said, if a person wants more information, it's there. Finding the information was, I guess you could say, time-consuming, because when I was growing up in San Francisco, it was during and then right after World War II. And so kind of wherever when you were growing up, you'd hear my uncle would talk about the war and what was going on, and we lived in a part of San Francisco that was just off of the Hunters Point Naval Base. And so the whole neighborhood had been affected by the war and the influx of people and so on. We used to play in the projects, as they called them, but it was government housing that was in the 1950s was coming apart. So that we were kind of immersed in the whole war story and the giant net that they dropped at the Golden Gate, so Japanese submarines couldn't enter and so on. You'd be going to a picnic, and then somebody'd be on the boat going across the bay and say, they used to have a net, and it's over on that island there. You're a little kid. Oh, okay. So I was totally immersed in this, and then I asked the question, what about the UP? Was there any World War II connection? I thought, can't be much in the middle of the country. And then I started looking around. There wasn't much information, and so that became a project. I got a research grant from the university to pursue it, and all of a sudden I find, yes, there was a lot going on. We had 5 prisoner of war camps. We had 10,000 military at Sault Ste. Marie guarding the canal. What do you call them? barrage balloons, smoke screens and whatnot. We had a conscientious objector camp, one of three very severe conscientious objector camps. One was a germ fast. We had the president of Northern and faculty and people in town on the roof of Graverette School looking for possibly German or Japanese planes coming in to bomb the canal. Was that going to happen? No, but it got people involved in the war. It wasn't like today we have these wars and so on, but as we found out, we don't know that we're in dozens of countries. All of a sudden it pops up. Well, in World War II, you knew that there was a war going on, you're buying bombs and so on. And so I was able to pursue that with the grants and so on and pull the story of World War II together. The good part about that is that over the years now, John Pepin and other people have done videos and have written books and articles and so on. So it was really exciting to see not only my own research, putting something together for my book, but also seeing that people were able to utilize that material that I gathered. And that's the whole purpose of gathering the material. I could use it, but then have it in libraries and have it available for the public. And there were other topics that I pursued. One that I came across was in the 1976 bicentennial supplement of the Mining Journal. I opened it up and what's this? Front Street? And the KKK marching down Front Street. What's this all about? And so I pursued that and found that the Klan was very alive and well in the Upper Peninsula, all through the UP, except for the very strong Catholic town of Escanaba. There they didn't make any headway, but all the other towns the Klan was quite alive and well. And that demanded, newspaper checks of newspaper articles and so on and so on. But it was an area, I was down at the pub one night and mentioned it. There were some people holding up the bar. And I mentioned the Klan. This guy's arguing with me. Well, professor's going to tell me about my history. My mother never told me. I'm from Segola. My mother never told me the Klan was up here. So a few weeks later, I gave him a copy of the paper I had done. I said, "Here, check it out." And he did buy me a beer, so he was happy. I haven't seen him since, but anyway, he added to his knowledge and so on. So there were a lot of many topics that I was able to pull together. Probably the big thing is that I was able to, or my focus was the entire UP and not, the Marquette Iron Range, and then just stuck with that. But and that was when I was doing the course, and really it was the course at Northern that drove me to develop, the original syllabus and pull the whole story together in some form. And then that is the result now is the book. And then over the years there've been, I've done a lot of publishing and books and articles and so on the UP. But one of the recent ones, I got a call from the History Press. You might be familiar with it. It's the Arcadia, and now they've also included the History Press. They bought into it. And the History Press called me up and they wanted me to do a book on beer in the Upper Peninsula. And I'd always been interested in food in the UP. They actually wanted a culinary history of the UP. And I said, well, I kind of promised it to Michigan State. I can't give it to you. And then they called me back, do you have anything else? What about beer? I said, well, I know the beer story in the UP. So anyway, I started putting it together. And that was interesting because they sent me a copy of their book on beer in South Carolina. And so I opened the book And what do I get is on the page is a copy of a colonial newspaper, Beer 1731. And I'm thinking, the UP, we're going to begin when the Germans come in the 1850s. Okay, I'll go with it. Well, then I soon learned that, it kind of came up with Jacques Cartier and scurvy, that the French and the British were making tea out of spruce needles, and it's very good. It's full of vitamin C, and so we were actually making beer in the Upper Peninsula back into the 1600s. So all of a sudden, we didn't have to begin in 1850. We could almost go back to 1650. So I was happy about that. So the book came out on beer in the UP. And then they came and they said, do you want to do another book? And I said, Italians in the UP, and they weren't interested in that. It's not going to sell. Okay. What about Prohibition in the UP? Yeah, that's another one I'm familiar with. And so that was the second book they published. That came out in both my, the history of the UP and Prohibition in the UP came out in June, this last June. And that is exciting. If you want kind of an exciting book and enlightening, well, they're both very good. But the Prohibition, the Prohibition book is you've heard some of the stories from relatives and whatnot, grandparents, what we used to do and so on. And I remember there was a fellow, Dave Solani, might have heard the name, and he was. We were doing interviews on people that had worked, had been involved in St. Mary's and then St. Luke's hospitals over the years. And Dan Mizuki said, you have to interview Dave Solani because he's a greeter at the hospital. So I do the interview, and within 5 minutes, he's told this story. I enjoy my work. I sit at the greeting desk, and that's the end of it. Then he starts talking about his life in Calumet. Well, his family, his mother in particular, his father was in jail frequently. His mother would round up, and we got this all on tape. Anyway, she would send him out. He was about 13. They had a big Lincoln car, heavy car, and he would go out and bring back barrels of moonshine. Now, when you talk about moonshine, that is straight liquor. I mean, alcohol, white alcohol. And he would he would bring the barrels in. His mother had the whole thing set up, and she would then pour in a chicken bouillon into this stuff that's almost fulminating. It's so strong, and throw in some dye and bouillon and some other stuff, and then rebottle it, and then he would run around Calumet area selling it and so on. So all of a sudden, the interview went from 5 minutes of nothing to this wonderful hour-long discussion. And he said, everybody complained during the Depression how we didn't have enough to eat. We're eating large sandwiches and so on. He said, I never had that problem. We had the big car. Well, my dad wasn't around that often, but anyway, when he did get home from the Detroit House of Corrections, we partied, but we had a wonderful time. And so he was kind of the first person I interviewed from that time that didn't have a problem. We weren't in misery during that era. So it's been putting a lot of this material for these different books and for the history of the UP and things based on interviews. In the 1980s, I went and did a series of interviews with dealing with Italians in the Upper Peninsula. The Finns had just finished a big project up at Ashland College. And then Finlandia was involved. Finlandia University was involved. And I thought, well, why don't I do the Italians in the UP? And so I had to think about it. It took me about 6 months to think about it because I said, wait a minute, I'm going to have to travel from Marquette about 160 miles to the Sioux, 90 miles to and more to the Copper Country, 90 miles to Iron Mountain, 130 or so to Ironwood and so on, where the Italians were scattered around. And I finally said, okay, I'll bite the bullet, I'll do it. And I ended up there, and these are all now online, well, most of them, I think. And there's like 150 interviews dealing with the Italian story. The only problem with it was that when I had a student going through and kind of indexing it, she said, you know, all these people, wherever they're at, they keep telling the same story. Well, at least we know it's accurate. We make wine, we make sausage, and down the line and so on. So anyway, that's kind of just some little overview of the project. And I guess what I usually like to do is just open it to questions, because sometimes people have a question I don't answer, you know, I'm not answering it. So I'll answer any questions you have on anything you want about the UP. Yeah.
So in the Detroit area during Prohibition, there was a lot of crime with smuggling across from Windsor and things like that. And the Purple Gang, and as treacherous as they were, was there anything like that in the UP?
Yep. And that was one thing I found that usually you don't hear anyone really talk about it, and it's certainly not written about. I found it very interesting. You don't find a lot of written records. You'll find things in the newspapers. You'll find stories that people will tell. Nothing written, except I'm going through towards the end of the project. I'm going through some papers. My mom passed away at 6 years ago or so, and we still had papers that I hadn't gone through. And I picked this thing up and I look, and here is a handwritten. She always took handwritten notes when she went on trips. Nothing really highly organized, but the dates are there, and this, and this. And she had a journal of her honeymoon down the coast of California with the amounts of liquor they were drinking. Now, this is a woman 20 years old. The amounts of liquor they were drinking, the cost, and it came to, when I figured it out, and it was also the same in Chicago, it was $27, today's money, for a half pint of unknown liquor. Moonshine. Would you pay that? Would anyone? No. It's a lot cheaper, and you're not going to drink something that could blind you. So what I found was, and so anyway, I was able to use some of that. But what I found was, and what that was never really told, everybody sort of knows the story that they ran the booze across the Detroit River. There was even one legend that the distillery on the Canadian side had put a pipe under the Detroit River so that the liquor would just flow into Detroit. They didn't do that. They were just running boats. And that was also the other thing that happened with that was that the wooden boat builders, and they have that big festival at Cedarville, Hessel in the summer, in August, which I would recommend going to. Fantastic. They built these wooden boats, and they used surplus airplane engines on the boats to outrun the Coast Guard. And so you had all of that going on, but it also went on up here at the Sioux, through North Channel, through the labyrinth of lakes and rivers and whatnot in the St. Mary's area. And the first retail wooden boat company was at Cedarville. I wonder why. And you also had, for instance, people at Mackinac. There was a big ad they were doing in the daytime. They would take you around the island in 20 minutes, fast boat. Around the island in 20 minutes. Well, what were they doing at night when you could bring back hundreds of dollars worth of booze from Canada? And so you had the liquor coming in that way, but it was also coming in across Lake Superior. And there's, some of you might know, there's a little place, I don't even want to call it a cove, a little place up here on the way to Big Bay called, Rum Runners Cove. And it's this little narrow thing. You kind of look at it. Well, more than likely, a larger boat came. The larger boats did not want to they didn't want to anchor and get stuck there in case the Coast Guard or somebody came after them. So they would stay offshore and then bring the liquor in rowboats. And so there's this very nice little dock, you might say, for a small boat to come into. And so it was coming into Marquette. You know that the bottom of Baroness Street, there's they call it the Customs House, that sandstone building that everybody said, what are they going to do with? And people say, well, the owner's asking millions of dollars for the building and so on. The stuff would be landed there. And then you might know Blaine Betts, his father, Ed Betts, was a policeman and then saw he could make more money booze. And so he had a up by the courthouse, he had a kind of a dry cleaners or a press shop where they would press your clothes. And he had his kids out front pressing clothes in the window. He would then, you would bring your coat in to be pressed or cleaned. And he would then make pockets in the coat and then would fill the pockets with the little special little bottles for the booze. So you'd go in, if the police are watching, you'd go in with your coat, the middle of July, over your shoulder, over your arm, bring it in to be pressed. In the wintertime, you would go in with the coat on and then one in your arm, and he would then return it a few days later filled with booze.
Oh.
So it was coming in there, it was coming in through the Copper Country. They said just about everybody in the Copper Country were taking their boats, maybe taking a chance, depending on the weather, and crossing over to Thunder Bay and picking up booze and coming back and forth. I found one boatload of Johnny Walker Scotch landed at a place called Little Girls Point, just north of Ironwood Hurley. And they came in with 2,000 cases of Johnny Walker Scotch. And this was in great demand because they could get homemade hooch. But again, you didn't know what it was. But this was authentic Johnny Walker Scotch. And it then came into Ironwood. The people that knew about it bought some, went to Hurley. Quite a few people bought it. And then the rest of it went down to Milwaukee and Chicago. So what you have, the little known story, which is in the book, is the way liquor just flowed across Lake Superior. And you wanted to be in this area. Al Capone. People talk about, you've heard the story. Al Capone was in the UP. Oh, you hear the story. It's like, what? It's crazy. He's down in Chicago. It's not the UP. But you have to remember, Al Capone, his favorite beverage was Canadian Club. And there are all sorts of stories. He had outlets in Canada through Minnesota and then through the Great Lakes. And so these stories that Al Capone was in Escanaba, that's usually the focal point. And I remember a librarian there who really had no reason to lie, said that her grandfather had served Al Capone, sold him in North Escanaba, sold him cigarettes, and then he left $5 and said, buy candy for the kids when they come in. Is she lying? Are you going to find that written up in the daily press in Escanaba? No. But you get these stories. So, and the Purple Gang, Mackinac, would attract the Capone folks from Chicago. They would come up in large boats, and the liquor was brought in not only to the Grand Hotel. The Grand Hotel had gambling going on. It was very interesting with the Grand Hotel. The state police would raid the Grand Hotel the day after it closed in September. And there'd be a big thing, and they took out gambling equipment today worth $1 million. I mean, it's all the best of equipment and so on, but it was always done the day after they closed. And there was a big thing in the paper, state police did their job. But the Capone folks would come up to Mackinac and bring it down, and the Purple Gang came up from Detroit and then would pick up the liquor, because sometimes the police did close off Windsor, so they were looking for any other outlet, and this was perfect up here because you wanted to be in the middle of nowhere. Grand Marais, liquor coming into Grand Marais, absolutely. It's an out of the way place. Nobody, you're gonna see the police coming at a distance, and yeah, it would come into all of these out of the way places. Capone would send it across. Indians worked with them across from Botchwana Bay across Whitefish Bay to Whitefish Point, and so the liquor was coming across that way. And there was a little girl, a woman writing when she was a little girl, how she and her friends at night went down to the shore and saw these big black cars load up with boxes of something from a boat that was coming from off of again the large boat holding offshore and then bringing the stuff in. So you had all of that going on up here, but I think for the first time you get it in the book. I had never seen it talked about. So you had all of that going on here. Any other? Yes.
In Magnaghi murdered a military fellow in real life, was sent to Big Bay during the war for an anti-aircraft assignment or something.
What now
in the movie Anatomy of Murder story?
Yeah.
In real life, the military man was sent to Big Bay. He was assigned to Big Bay as something to do with the anti-aircraft or something up there. You know anything about that?
It wouldn't have been so much anti-aircraft. There was no anti-aircraft anything up there. But it was again. It would have been just observing planes and whatnot.
It was actually an artillery testing site.
Up there?
Testing artillery rounds, lobbing them
Out
into
into the
a
lake.
temporary site.
Okay.
Assigned. I don't know where they got the rounds. Somewhere.
And the other thing is that you don't, if you stay up late at night, you'll sometimes hear what seem to be large planes. And I know I'd hear them when Sawyer lived out in Sand River, and you'd hear it when Sawyer was operating, and it's these big bombers and so on have to fly at a 500-foot level. But you don't want to be flying on a rugged terrain of hills and whatnot and trees, and so they would train, and I think they still do. They come from distances to fly over Lake Superior, and you know where the boat channel is, and there's a lot more room out there, so these planes can. So there was a lot of things like that. At Rayco, there was a station. There was a landing place in. I think around Grand Marais, there was some kind of a landing place that the Canadians wanted to have a place where an emergency stop on the way. So there were a lot of little things that were going on besides what I wrote about. And the thing was that it was, and I won't say that my discussion of World War II is complete because I didn't go through all 15 newspapers. And so if you go through all of the newspapers, you'd find little stories about some of these things. Yes?
The Purple Gang, where did they get their name, and is there any connection to the families that have the name Purple?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. Where they got the name, I don't know. They were extremely vicious, worse than anything you've seen on TV. Well, they couldn't put the things that they did, they could not put on television for the public. And eventually 3 of them ended up in the branch prison. And I think they spent the rest, they had life sentences. They had a meeting amongst themselves, and they ended up shooting each other. and were caught and were sent up here. And there was even a time when they were talking about, there were so many, the prison was so filled with people that had violated the prohibition law that they were talking about expanding prisons all across the country. And that was one of the things that brought an end to prohibition, where they would be the taxes that people were going to have to pay. And they said, wait a minute, we're paying taxes when we could be drinking beer? This doesn't make sense. And then and there was one fellow, what was his name? Truman, I think it was. He was a representative from Newberry. And he had been, for prohibition all the way. By the time you get to 1930, 1931, well, yeah, it would be good to cut off all liquor, but we can also bring in a lot of taxes and jobs for people that are, you're in the heart of the Depression. Maybe we'll go the other way. And so he turned and went, against prohibition. Yes.
Did Canada have prohibition?
Oh, Canada was a weird situation during the war, and the whole thing was that prohibition was promoted during the war as a way to better use grain, get rid of making beer and liquor, though people talked about beer being the liquid bread. And so they had prohibition, but it was by province. But you could make it, but not sell it in the province. But I mean, it kind of becomes absurd. How are you going to control this, keg of beer? Well, what happens to it? And so what they would do in all these spots, the Canadians would, or Americans would go over, load a boat up with liquor, and they couldn't sell it. They couldn't sell it in Canada, in Ontario especially. They would then consign it to Cuba. Sault Ste. Marie to Cuba? I don't think so. And so it just come across the border. And then you also have the story of the Coast Guard. The story of the Coast Guard on the East Coast is fantastic. They intercepted liquor and so on and so on. At Sault Ste. Marie, remember, Coast Guardsmen are what, 20, 30 years old? They're drinking. Do they care? No. So they would go over to the Canadian side, find out when they were going to run some liquor over, and then the Coast Guard made sure they were up or down river, but they weren't at the point of transfer. And there were all sorts of stories that I came across, again, untold. I found there was a U.S. consulate in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and I went through some of those reports, and they point out that the Coast Guard would intercept a boat coming, a small boat loaded, almost sinking with so much liquor coming across the St. Mary's River, Sugar Island, places like that, and the Coast Guard then would help them out. And they would transfer all the liquor onto the Coast Guard cutter, and then it would bring it to the Purple Gang boat downriver. So you had all of this interaction going on. I don't know if the Coast Guard wanted to hear that story, because they are, in general, the Coast Guard did a very good job of intercepting and enforcing the law. Everybody else, from the presidents of the United States, they would get 0 points. Congress, 0 points, and so on. The Coast Guard gets 10 points. They did a good job. But the rest of the country, even the state police that was supposed, and that was they were created for internal security during World War I. Then as we saw the war was going our way and so on, and prohibition started, state prohibition started on May 1st, 1918, they said, okay, the state police, which was the constabulary, Michigan State Constabulary, mounted on horses, your job is to enforce prohibition. And finally, within a few months, a very short amount of time, the commander of the state police, Vandercook, kind of throws his hands in the air. He says, my men are going 24 hours a day. It's dangerous. They're getting shot, and especially downstate. They were running liquor from Toledo to Detroit. This is when prohibition was statewide in Michigan, so you could bring liquor in from Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, and the state police had a terrible time. It was very, very dangerous. And he said, nobody cares. If the sheriff tries to enforce it, he's going to be voted out. If anybody tries to enforce it on the local level, they're finished politically. What are we doing? And so he goes and he resigns and he goes back to what he had done at one point and spends the rest of his life as a lobbyist for the Michigan Railroad Association. And he and Roy Vandercook was he professionalizes the Michigan State Police when that started. But it was all centered around prohibition. Okay, any other?
Did you go through a lot of microfilm on newspapers?
Did I go through microfilm on newspapers? What they have, in a sense, yes, but even better. What they have today is there are two different systems, and if anyone's interested, anyone doing research, it is worth I don't know what I paid for it, $100 a year or more. You get an index, an electronic index. Now, not all newspapers, and unfortunately the Mining Journal is not part of that. They had some problems with the way the microfilm was done. It wasn't done as clear as it should have been, so they can't do it. But it is indexed electronically. I don't know how they do it, but it is electronically indexed. So I can go, the papers that I dealt with were the papers in Escanaba and a fantastic collection from Ironwood. And you go in there and then I could put in Rum Runner, and then it'll give you every citation in the paper dealing with Rum Runner, or whatever the topic is. And these newspapers are across the country. You can bring in the Canadian newspapers, and I would say that book would not be what it eventually became, as thorough as it was without that system. So I did use newspapers, and I would have loved to been able to use, especially the two papers, Iron Mountain and Marquette, and those are not on that.
You did have a citation in your prohibition book about Orville Whelan from Chenaring, and it said it came out of the Mining Journal.
Oh, so some of those were items that were on file that I was able to use, but I couldn't go through the entire Mining Journal. It would have been, because these citations would come up sporadically. So I'd still be working.
That's why I asked, because we have all of these verbal stories that I'm trying to confirm.
Oh, okay.
And is there any central repository of who spent time in prison for?
Yes. Is there any central depository as to who spent time in prison? You can go to, which they have in the archives, the county court records, and they'll be listed. Sometimes they're listed in the Mining Journal, but you can actually get the record in the archives. So you go back to they have an index. You go back and you'll see why they went to court, and then you go and take a look at what happened, and it'll have the name of the person, and then where they fined, went to jail, and so on. If you want to go the next step and see what came up in federal court, those records have all been transferred to the Federal Records Center in Chicago. And there you could go and find all of the records, and there you'd be looking at, you'd go and find that they would sometimes list them in the newspaper. There might be like 40 cases, in court. 39 of them dealt with liquor. One might deal with a business problem of some sort, or domestic something. One, and the rest were the 39 were all. And there was even a judge in Detroit, a Judge Stein, finally said, "I'm not going to waste my time. I'm sorry. I don't care what the federal prohibition people say. I am not wasting the court's time, the public's time, dealing with prohibition violators, and he just stopped running the cases. I don't know what happened to him. You know, I don't think anything happened. But it just totally overwhelmed the court system because everything was focused on prohibition. And as I said, huge numbers of cases. And then they had to go to, they had some cases in Marquette, but most of them were in the federal court in Sault Ste. Marie. So if you got picked up in Copper Country, you then had to go to Sault Ste. Marie for your trial. It was, you know, it was just kind of a mess, inconvenient. But, yes.
Access any of those federal records online?
Any what?
Of the federal charges online?
No, you would find, yeah, they would show up in newspaper accounts, but there's nothing. No, those records are not available. It'd be nice if you just go in there and then look at them, but they're not. So you have to go. You'd have to go through an index and then go through and find the court cases. It would be time consuming. So I wasn't going to do that. I just took the position. Yeah, they went to federal court, a lot of them. And there were people from here that ended up, usually they would end up on, if it was a state, depending on how much you sold and got caught with, and especially if you were selling liquor to children, and they were. And I said, gee, this is terrible, son. There's no law against it. So if you want to sell a bottle of whiskey to a 10-year-old, there's no law. If you wanted to sell liquor around the clock, there's no law. So now we end liquor sales at 2 o'clock? Nothing. You're not supposed to have liquor, so there's no backup. And so, if you caught for the first time and so on, you might get a small fine taken care of at the county level. I found it very interesting looking at the police reports in Marquette. The chief of police, they have to turn in a report for the year. The chief of police had drunkenness, 100 people were arrested, and so on. Violating prohibition law, 0. So it's very obvious that the Marquette City Police weren't doing their job or didn't particularly care. So you would get, so you'd have that level. Then if you were caught with a truckload of liquor or something, then you could end up going to federal court. But there was a fellow here, well, for instance, what's his name? Grove. He was the official federal agent enforcing the prohibition law in Marquette, for the UP, and he was headquartered in Marquette in the old courthouse, which was the federal courthouse, which is the courthouse today. Across the street, by the way, was a speakeasy. I mean, you could look out the window when they were at work. He had 6 agents for the whole UP. 2 of them were stationed on the St. Mary's River, so he had 4 agents to cover the whole Upper Peninsula. And so then the state police would get it, they were activated and so on. And locally, people like in Escanaba just flat out said, we didn't vote for it. 82% voted against prohibition. We're against it, and the police aren't going to enforce it. And they got into a lot of trouble. The state attorney general kind of cracked down on them and got rid of the sheriff, or I don't know. There was a lot of this going on, but I was going to put dots where I found where there were stills in the UP, and it would have been a map of the UP colored in red because it was going on all over the place, in town, out of town, in the middle of the woods. You had cars that where you haul the stuff in heavy cars, Buicks, Lincolns, and so on. And they even had it set up so that the steering wheel was connected to the front lights of the car. And so when you turn through the woods and whatnot, the police are chasing you, you turn right, the lights followed the car followed the lights. And you read about you read the book, and it's about American creativity. It is unbelievable what people came up with when forced technology at its finest. How are we going to avoid the law? How are we going to avoid being arrested? And then if they went to jail, the price you pay, come out, they went right back to work running a pool room and serving liquor on request. Any other questions? Okay, well,
The change or something. You said the Klan was pretty well established in the UP at one time. And
yes.
Did you say they marched in the 70s? Was that in the 70s?
In what?
Did you say they had a rally like in the 70s in Marquette?
Yeah, they were the Klan clubhouse, spelled with a K, it's on the corner of 5th and Bluff. It used to be it was kind of interesting. It was Alto Hall, they were against drinking. Then it became the Klan headquarters, they were against drinking. And then later on, it was a church of some sort, they were against drinking. Now it's an apartment house, but that was the Klan headquarters in Marquette. And they had parades, usually around Labor Day. And they had rallies out on farms in Magnaghi and whatnot, and that shows up in the paper. You get like an advertisement of some of the stuff going on.
Bicentennial.
The what?
When would that have been?
That was the 19th.
Bicentennial.
Oh, these were the Klan I'm talking about is the 1920s.
Okay.
But there have been various incidents in the Klan seems to be from what one of my former students who was then teaching in northern Wisconsin found that the Klan was, and the Posse Comitatus and so on, was kind of very active and might still be very active in northern Wisconsin. Doesn't seem to really get I don't think there are too many Klan members across the border in the UP. But if you remember, a number of years ago, they were going to have a Klan rally in Ironwood. And there was, they were finally shouted down and so on. But those people came from Wisconsin to Ironwood, and they wanted to have a rally, and it didn't go anyplace. And the people were quite proud of the fact that they had never, the Upers were proud that they had never been part of that. That movement, the present day movement. But the fellow that was teaching there was quite surprised at he saw all these kids wearing Confederate flag, emblems and whatnot. In northern Wisconsin, what's the connection? And we're all members of the Klan. What's the problem with that? He's like in a state of shock, And then he took the kids to a technical school down in Green Bay or something. And you can only imagine what happened when this busload of northern Wisconsinites passed a bunch of African Americans. Not nice. They're yelling out the window and so on. So it's, rather active. And it came up in the 1970s over spearfishing and Native Americans. And, how many fish are the Native Americans going to take spearfishing? But it was a big thing that involved the Klan at that time. But again, the whole Klan thing didn't revive itself in the UP. And the Klan in the UP was kind of really very much focused on prohibition. They were really big into prohibition. And it was also true of some other places as well, but you have to be careful with that because who is violating the prohibition law? Slovenians, Italians, some Swedes, some Cornish, so on and so on, immigrants. So it all blended together. You're anti-immigrant. Now you have these immigrants selling liquor, making liquor, selling it. So you have a reason to not like them. So it all kind of tied together.
Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up on maybe just one more question. I just want to point out that the archives is open Monday through Friday, 10 to 5 and 10 to 7 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Much of Dr. Magnaghi's research occurred at the archives. And he mentioned the court records, for example. We are a local records government depository for the state of Michigan archives. And so all of the court records from Martin County are all the way back to 1852, which was the first court record case. You can actually come in anytime, go through the index that he mentioned, and look at those if you like. And we have all of the newspapers, in part thanks to Dr. Magnaghi, because we purchased them several years ago for the UP. Are there actually 15 copies? Yeah, I guess there are more than that. Yeah. And those are all available on microfilm if you'd ever like to do research. So feel free to come to the archives. I know we're not actually in the archives, we're in the library, and I am not a librarian, I'm an archivist. Thank you very much. Again, you're more than welcome to come anytime. You don't have to have any reason to come to the archives other than you're interested in some of the research or doing some history. And you don't even have to make an appointment, although if you're going to start a major research project, I would encourage you to make an appointment with me so we can sit down and talk about what we have and the collections we have. Most of our collections are finding aids are also online. If you have trouble finding those, give me a call and I'll help you out. With that, I'd like to thank Dr. Magnaghi very much for speaking tonight about his interesting research, and my two students, assistants, Libby, Serra, and Lydia, Henning, who had to leave for their work as well. And thank you all for coming tonight. It was really great to see you on this cold night.